Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our session on unpacking that wonderful keynotes presentation and reimagining education. My name is Martha Wilkins, and my colleague Jennifer Kreider and I will be moderating or hosting this panel. Our panelists are Carla Williams, a doctoral student from Lewis University and the head of counseling at Proviso High School, Jennifer Hernandez, a veteran special education teacher and currently a professor at Southern Illinois University, Edwardsville, and finally Keisha Rambert, who's a teacher of over 15 years, a doctoral student and an assistant professor at National Louis University. Jennifer, would you like to take it away?
Sure. So that was a very short introduction to our three panelists. And we did that. So we would like to give each of them 2 to 3 minutes now to introduce themselves. And they all have fantastic bios, amazing things that they have done, but we want to give them 2 to 3 minutes to kind of highlight the things that they have done or they've been involved with or that are in their background that tie into the keynote that we just had and tie into making Black Lives Matter at school. So, Keisha, would you like to begin?
Sure. I'm so excited to be here and just feel so privileged to have listened to Denisha. My name is Keisha Rembert. I am first the daughter of John and Beverly, who are migrants from the Jim Crow South. I am the granddaughter of Katie Mae and John Henry, and the granddaughter of Jesse and Lila Mae. And I say that because I'm so proud of my heritage and my lineage and the things that my grandparents instilled in my parents and that they instilled in me. And just thinking that I can sit in front of you as a Black woman today and talk about these things and talk about my own educational journey, knowing that my father didn't graduate high school and knowing that my mother had to work like HE double hockey sticks to progress in city government and state government before going off on her own is just a severe testament to my parents and my grandparents. I come at this work and Jen and I know each other because we both served on the Illinois State's board to develop the culturally relevant teaching and learning standards for the state of Illinois, which we're really excited about that are getting enacted in teacher prep programs around the state. So that is really important work to me. And I loved how Denisha talked about curriculum as windows, mirrors, and sliding glass doors. As a former middle school English teacher, that hit me right in the heart and really speaks to me about why those culturally relevant standards are important. I do a lot of anti-racist work with the National Council for Teachers of English and their subsidiaries like Allen. I'm on their board. I work as an advisor to the Holocaust Museum and just thinking about anti-racism in all its facets and bringing it to all students in the state. So I'm so excited to start unpacking so much that was in that quick but jam-packed hour that Denisha shared with us.
Thank you. Jennifer, would you like to go next?
Sorry, I made the official Zoom error and left myself muted as I was talking. In my introduction, it was mentioned that I am a veteran special ed teacher. And so I came to this work actually working in special ed, but working primarily with students in incarceration facilities and in mental health and court-ordered residential facilities, which I unfortunately began to witness systemic oppression in the form of the school to prison nexus as it was working. And kind of like the Matrix, that one day I took the blue pill and I could never see anything ever again when I saw myself as merely a spoke in the wheel of oppression that I was perpetuating as a teacher. So quickly, I decided that the best way to make that real impact was to become an administrator, because then I could really make change, right? That's what we believe when we go into it. And so I took the job July 1st for Ferguson Florissant School District as their special ed director. And on August 14th, Michael Brown was murdered. And our school district, our teachers, our children, the community, we were just thrown into civil unrest in ways that a lot of us didn't know how to manage and then unpack. And so it became my part as an administrator to acknowledge, understand the cultural mismatch that was happening with 89% of our teachers in the district being white, driving into Ferguson to serve 99% of students, which are Black and Ferguson community members. That brought me to culturally responsive teaching right away. Understanding the framework around culturally responsive teaching, but also understanding Paolo Freire's work about educators having that praxis, that critical consciousness, as well as a plan for social action to minimize oppression in the classroom. And I began my work there with the teachers and the staff and Ferguson Florissant. Soon went to Quinnipiac University and did that work in New Haven, Connecticut and New York City public schools. And now I'm back at SIUE. And as we are preparing our teacher candidates to become culturally responsive abolitionist educators under a critical race theory, Black Lives Matter framework, for which we are unapologetic to anyone about. And side note, this work has always been illegal, so they can ban it all they want, and I'm still going to be doing it. But we are also working with our in-service teachers. We are partnering with school districts all over the Metro St. Louis area. And so while we're preparing teacher candidates, our teachers in the classroom are getting the same information. So we are creating a pipeline to really dismantle and disrupt white supremacy in public education. Thanks.
Excellent. And Carla, would you like to introduce yourself?
Absolutely. And let me first just start by saying good afternoon to everyone, and wanting to just say a hearty thank you to Dr. Denisha for that amazing presentation and for the light she shed with this audience today, and how impactful that's going to be to this panel and the discussions that we can have going forward. I too am the daughter of parents who migrated from the Jim Crow South. And part of my history that I'm very proud to tell, my great-grandfather tells the story of how he was hung from a tree and managed to escape that hanging because he was his own business owner and had no right to be that in 1913. And so because of that, his home was raided. He was dragged out of his home. He was hung from a tree and he escaped it. And he had the scars around his neck to prove it. Though he embellished the story across the years, I do love to believe that blood still runs very heartily in my veins, that that survival, that willingness to fight, that necessity to advocate for racial inequity is the same blood that pumps through my body. And so I pay homage to my ancestors by continuing in this journey and in my way, lending my voice to this fight. So again, my name is Carla Williams. I am the division head for counseling, social work, and students in special education at Proviso West High School in Hillside. And so this is my 14th year in education here at Proviso, where I've worn plenty of hats. And I'll tell you what really made me transition over to this work. I found that in my building, our student demographic is pretty much 50-50 Hispanic and African American, but our teaching population is about 85% white. And the teachers that seem to love Carla so much did not love our students as much. And I took issue with that. The way that I was embraced as a colleague and the way I was worked with as a colleague, our students were not given that same professional latitude. And so I took issue with that and found that someone had to amplify their voice. Someone had to advocate for their needs. Someone had to be the voice of reason. And I could not wait for it to be someone else. And I think we oftentimes try to ignite the fire underneath someone else to be that voice, but I had to take on that responsibility for my students. And so part of what I've done in my work here was really advocate for my students by really engaging our staff in these really difficult conversations about race, equity, and social justice. Leading book studies and hosting professional developments inside of my building about what race work looks like, what kind of conversations we should be having with students, bringing culturally sensitive conversations into the classroom, failing to ignore the climate of the country by pretending that things are not happening when students come into your classroom every day and they've seen the news or they've seen social media posts, but they get inside of our classrooms and we pretend that it hasn't happened. That is the greatest injustice that we could ever do to students when they come to us they get everything they need essentially from inside of our buildings. And when we fail to acknowledge that, we really tell our kids that their lived experiences are not real experiences and that they don't exist. And so we have to really be really strong and courageous about how we have those conversations. And that's been the platform that I've worked really hard to build here at Proviso, so that we are having those conversations about racial identity and racial climate and background in our building.
Thank you so much to our esteemed panelists. We are so happy to have you and to have you as a part of this discussion. And so let's just jump right into it. Ladies, and it's no particular order, but can you talk about one of the things that was the greatest takeaway for you from Dr. Jones's presentation and maybe correlate that to work that you're doing or have done?
I can jump in if it's okay with everyone else. So it's hard to pick one thing. So let me start there. To say one, I don't know that there's just one thing, but I'll just start here. Initially, at the very beginning of the presentation, Dr. Jones talked about ACEs and trauma. And I think that for a lot of people, we don't realize that being Black is traumatic. That's a trauma in and of itself. And if you're a young Black person who's growing up inside of a community, if you're growing up poor, inside of a community that's drug infested, gang infested, you're seeing violence on your street corners day in and day out. You can't walk back and forth to the corner store without seeing sirens and ambulances, going up and down your street. That is traumatic, and that is the narrative that you're growing up with. That's normalcy for you, and the fact that that is your normalcy is trauma. And so when Dr. Denisha talked about really teaching from this place of joy, that really does something to me. Because if all that I've ever seen is that trauma, if that's been my only experience in life from the time that I've been able to see life and experience life, for some other trusted adult to have me in their space for 6-7 hours a day and talk to me about this is not who you are. You are more than this. You are better than, you come from something greater than this. That is so powerful. That deficit thinking if we can redefine the narratives by which we define what Blackness is and the way we train and teach young kids who they are, that is the way that we really counteract what the world has told us about what it means to be Black. And so when we talk about that teaching for Black joy, that really just, it just moved me, shook my world. Because I think that that's what we haven't taught. We've taught from this place of oppression, that we've taught that is something that we had to defend, like being Black was something that I've always had to defend, that there was no beauty in it and definitely no joy in it. And so to teach it from a place of beauty and joy, I think for young Black kids especially, it's a very powerful thing.
Yeah, I think that's what I would take away too. One of my takeaways too was just this idea of curricular violence, right? So Black students um, are born into a world of trauma that is DNA trauma, right? This trauma is passed down through the DNA, if we're going to be honest. And then they go to school and experience this curricular violence. And that curricular violence is the erasure of who they are. So when she talked about curriculum as mirrors and Black students not being able to see themselves in the mirror, or whether that be presented through the curricular violence of history and always perpetuating history from this deficit perspective. Um, and this idea that they don't get a window into a future, that Black students don't get a window into a future that is bright because of our curriculums. That really stuck with me. And I think about just that holistically, right? I think about the curricular violence of standardized tests that not only put Black students at risk, but also put Black communities at risk. And so I think about all of those things. I think she touched about so much. She talked about the humanization of people through curriculum, and this idea that you can't growth mind yourself. And this isn't her words. This was my interpretation of her words. But you can't growth mindset your way out of historical mindset. That you have to first understand that history, and that history has to undergird your teaching. And we don't, and I love the fact that we don't start from the deficit, but as educators, we have to understand that. We have to have this self-awareness of it and understand the powers and privileges that exist, so that we can empower students. Well, and I hate the word empower because our students come to us with power, but we have to recognize that power and get our students to utilize the power that they have. And so I love that idea of joy, but I also love that idea of curriculum as power, and how do we extract that power in curriculums?
Absolutely. And I would agree with both of you and just extend it one step further for me, for my own positionality, listening to Dr. Denisha Jones talk about Gloria Lutz and Billings' work around educational debt, right? And in that moral debt that she talked about when she was talking about anti-Blackness, especially working with young teacher candidates, which we know represents pretty much what teachers represent nationwide, or about 87% white females, right? To really highlight the explicit anti-Blackness in education, in policy, in curricula. And she didn't just stay there and name it, but then Dr. Jones went on to say, this is the lessons to create to combat it, right? Which is really helpful to all educators. But I think especially working with teacher candidates, we get this idea that racism is a very passive thing, right? Like, oh, here's privilege and there you are under it. How'd that happen, right? That gets rid of all of that. We know that the policies like zero tolerance, right? Or we know that policies around what is allowed to be taught is specifically, explicitly targeting racism, like racial inequity and systemic oppression, and they're not being subtle about it. Yet our educational responses as a community tend to be this subtle, colorblind passiveness thing about it. And I love the way Dr. Jones says, nope, here's the anti-Blackness and here's how you combat it. And I just don't know how it could have been said any better. It was brilliant.
I love that. I love how she talks about even the talk about the achievement gap, right? Like the way that we frame the achievement gap as and victimize Black students even further by putting the onus on them versus putting it on the system where it belongs. It's not an achievement gap, it's an access gap. It's an opportunity gap that was intentionally created.
Right. Absolutely.
Great. I want to, before we give you another question, I just want to encourage everybody that is listening. If you have questions, we have some questions that we wrote, but if you have questions that you would like to ask the panelists or topics you would like them to discuss, we really welcome your participation here. So this is a time for you to ask questions that are relevant to you and your work, and get the thoughts and the experiences of these panelists. So please go ahead and put those in the chats if you have those. The next question we had for you, which is a little bit redundant, but I'm going to see if you have other things to say about it. We'll kind of see how it goes. But we're specifically asking, what does Black Lives Matter at school mean to you? Anybody want to take that one?
It means peace to me. So it means, and I say that because, and it goes back to what Dr. Jones says. I don't want to provide a space that further traumatizes students. So when I say peace, it doesn't mean that it's not without its friction or not without us discussing hard topics. I want to make space for us to do that, but I want students to come away with that and walk away with that with peace. So I want to provide the opportunities for students to engage and actually drive their learning. I want them to be creative. I want them to be experimental. I want them to be inquisitive. I want them to direct their learning. And I think all of those things, and I want them to fail. And I know that that sounds harsh, but I want them to fail. I want them to fail in the peace and safety of my classroom. And I want them to see that it's okay, that they can get back up. So Black Lives Matter at school to me means providing this space that is student driven, that is student occupied, and that students understand themselves better and understand each other better because of the peace and the space that has been provided and created.
I would probably say Black Lives Matter for me in school is really about democratizing the classroom space, getting rid of Eurocentric master narratives and a top-down authoritarian structure. It's about retaking second-class citizenship that most marginalized identities feel in America, and teaching them the critical consciousness that they need to become an engaged, active citizen to maintain the ideal, the hope of the democracy that this country claims to be, right? In society around us, we're seeing every night explicit acts of white supremacy through voter suppression and felony disenfranchisement, and all these different ways, the way we fund public schools, the overwhelming amount of charter and school choice policies that are actually eliminating public school districts in New Orleans, and now where I am in St. Louis is about to lose there as well. So I think it's about removing and decentering the whiteness that is the classroom and all of the elements that make public education a system of white supremacy, and democratizing the entire space.
So this is where it can get tricky, right? Because I can go like 30 directions with this question. And so maybe I will. So let's just do that. So sorry guys, I tend to talk a bit. So when I think about it, I first have to, I guess the first thing I want to do is just acknowledge, like when I think about Black Lives Matter, for me, it gets to be such jargon, right? And I feel like we can use it so much that it doesn't carry weight anymore. It just becomes just like the next part, oh, Black Lives Matter, BLM, and I need for it not to be that. So I need for it not to be just the next big thing. And I need for people to really understand that it has to be more than a movement, but it really has to be a lifestyle, that it has to be a commitment to acknowledging that there is a systemic, oppressive operation of injustice that has denigrated a nation of people based on the color of their skin. And for that reason, and because we have been murdered, jailed, beaten, hung, raped, and otherwise enslaved, and because our treatment has been so inhumane and our existence has been offered with disregard, we had to rewrite an entire narrative and to tell the world something very, very basic, that we matter. So when I think about what does it mean inside of the classroom or inside of the building, it means for me that there is no longer, even though I know I have the right to remain silent, because that's the first thing I'll ever hear should I ever be arrested. It means that you cannot afford to be silent. That silence is no longer an option, that I have to give voice to the disparities that impact our students, and that I have to make sure they understand these microaggressions that are coming against them. They don't even know. Their lens is, their worldview can be so limited because they don't recognize the racial, they don't know. They don't see it. They don't know what they're experiencing and why. And so I feel that responsibility to ensure that their lens is clear and to teach them to advocate for themselves. Because when we don't use our voice, we lose our voice. And no matter how trivial the issue might be, we have to learn, we have to teach our kids to advocate. Something so simple. Kid in the lunch line, this is a true story. A student in the lunch line wanted a chicken sandwich, Black kid. And the lunch lady did not have a chicken sandwich ready, but there was pizza spinning on the rack. And she said, there's no chicken available, you can have the pizza. And she just put the pizza on the tray and gave it to him. And he took it and went to sit down. And it took everything in me not to snatch him and pull him back. But I did say, whoa, wait a minute. Did you want the pizza or did you want the chicken sandwich? And he said, Ms. Williams, I wanted the chicken sandwich. I said, I'm sorry, let's ask why you could not have the chicken sandwich. And he was afraid to ask why, because our kids are taught not to challenge authority. Man, why can't I have the chicken sandwich? Well, it's gonna take 7 minutes. Sweetheart, you are worth the 7-minute wait. Ask for the chicken sandwich. Well, I would really like the chicken sandwich. Point is, he was worth the 7-minute wait. We don't take what we can get. We get what we ask for. And when we don't use our voices, when we don't teach our students to use their voice, if we don't prepare them now, they will never survive the world to come. And so right now, for me, Black Lives Matter in the classroom is really helping students find their voices in this place that's safe for them, where they have support, where there are trusted adults who can really guide them and help them to learn advocacy, because this is where it starts.
Thank you so much.
So good. I'm sorry. I'm just going to that's so good. That was so good.
Thank you so much for all of your powerful commentary, really, really powerful commentary. And we'll talk about some of those things at the end. I do just want to make sure we get through our questions and have that time. But Erica Davila in the chat kind of asked a little bit of a similar question as we had next for you. And her question is, in addition to curriculum, what are concrete actions that folks in K-12 can take within the BLM movement, teachers, leaders, and families? And then we also wanted you to just kind of speak about times when you've taken action that may have been successful and at times when it wasn't successful. And Keisha, to your point, it's good sometimes that we fail. And so when have we maybe tried to do this work and we weren't successful or we were successful? So can you all speak on that?
I would love to answer Erica's question with my mantra that I've been saying for 20 years. White people, do your work. you have so much work to do about what you have been socialized about race, history, implicit bias. What is whiteness? How does it function? Be able to recognize white fragility when it's in your face and shut it down when it starts. Follow the leadership, the voices, the organizing, and the academic scholarship of people of color. They are the experts on this topic, living it, being a part of their life, and white people have got to be able to do their work. And I am speaking to white people specifically because to speak of successes and failures, as I go into school districts to do this work, and I do in the second day of their professional development, Black Lives Matter as the history of a movement and what it is. And I have been cussed out. I have been asked to leave. I've had people get up and walk out of my professional developments, telling me I'm racist against white people. I have had death threats. At the time when I was in Connecticut doing this work with white people, I had to have police escorts on campus. I have been in Ferguson in the streets, trying to work with Surge, showing up for racial justice that supported Black Lives Matter in Ferguson. Using that voice and as you said, the right to remain silent. The cops never gave me that option when I was maced or arrested in the street. So there is very few successes, let me say that, in this work, and it gets really, really hard. But Erica's brother and mine, Nate Williams, once said to me that being the rock in the creek where the water's crashing and pounding at you and taking a part of your energy is really, really hard. But knowing that that rock over time, as the river runs through, gets polished and smoothed and makes way for the people behind us, right, to do this work is what keeps me going.
I would also say listen. I think often as educators, we want a checklist. We want something that we can check off and say, okay, this is where I am on my journey to anti-racism and equity work. And unfortunately, it just doesn't work like that. And actually in that is one of the tenets of white supremacy that Dr. Jones talked about. So like maybe even just examining those tenets and listening to racialized people, like listen to us, listen to our stories, listen, like, our funds of knowledge are important and they are valuable and they are just as academic as any academia. And so I would say that that's important. A time when I have tried, I was a middle school teacher in the suburbs for a number of years. And I often try to have conversations about like, I'm in an affluent area. I am one of 2 teachers of color. How about we think about, I have a friend who is looking for a job, or, you know, we have some previous students of color, can we interview them? And really just, that didn't go anywhere. It was like I was talking into thin air. It wasn't until I kind of threatened to leave that the HR person said, well, let's talk about affinity groups and get affinity groups going, because I had started to do some policy work across the state with regard to recruiting and retaining teachers of color. And so I'd given them that policy brief and talked about, here's some examples of things that we can do to recruit and retain teachers of color. And that fell on deaf ears until it's like, you're gonna lose me. I can't fight within a system that isn't willing to also fight on my behalf and work with me. And so I did leave that district, and that district did start enacting affinity groups and did move. But sometimes we have to remove ourselves from toxic spaces in order for the change to happen. in order for that change to be realized. And I think that we can't have fear in doing that.
So I think I think one of the things that keeps us from making progress again is silence. And because we're too afraid to have conversations in public, but we have them in private all the time, and that keeps us from progressing. What I would say we could do and we should be doing in our spaces, and I'm in high school. I work in a high school building, and so I wear my positionality like a badge of honor. No one has to ever wonder what my position is, what I'm thinking, or what I'm feeling about race issues in my building. But I'm always approachable and I'm easily engaging. Like, you can come and talk to me about anything and people expect honesty from me. And so I really try hard to model that so that it becomes part of the culture here. So it has to be a shift in the culture of your building for it to ever work. And it starts, it's a slow clap. You know, it's not going to all happen at once, but the more we can start to help people feel comfortable, just kind of wearing their positionality like a badge, the more alignment you'll see, and you'll actually start to see more like-minded people, and then people who struggle will you know, if you're an approachable person, I've really had people come in and close my door and say, let me just ask a question, right? Like, you good at this whole Black thing, right? Let me just ask a question. I'm like, yeah, I can't take this off. What's your question? But we don't have those conversations. And when people feel like, I don't know much about your culture and I don't really have Black friends, so there's not a way for me to learn about it, or there's no safe place for me to go and ask these questions, how do we learn? Like, we can't learn if we're not communicating, if we don't create safe spaces for dialogue that are non-judgmental, where we're not demonizing people for their, I can't demonize you because you're white. I can't. We have to get away from that mindset too. I can demonize you for your beliefs and your behaviors. Act on it, we're gonna have a problem. But because you're white, I can't demonize you for that. However, I have to create a space where we can communicate about what you believe about me and what I believe about you. And we have to be able to have some shared understandings about how we grow in these spaces. And we have to get away from working alongside each other and learn how to work with each other. There's a difference there. There's a marked difference there. You can put us in the room together and we can get things done alongside each other, but it doesn't really teach us how to engage. Tolerance is fine. Acceptance is the goal. And so we have to be able to say there are very different things about us, and that's fine. I accept those things about you. We're very different, but we can coexist. We can work with each other. I can respect things about you. We can be professional. We can engage, and we can be productive. But we can't do that if we can't communicate. So we have to build those bridges and create those safe, shared spaces for dialogue.
Carla, can I ask you a question?
Sure.
When does that become extra labor? Because, like, I've heard people say that you know, like, I can't be the person who everybody comes to their door, and I need other people at some point to do their work, versus depending on me as a Black woman to always do that work for you. So, like, where's the line for that? And I think and I'm asking you that because you seem to have be in a space where that culture is acceptable and okay, and I think some people aren't, and so I would just love to be able to.
Yeah, so I think you're absolutely right, and I think everyone has to draw their own line. But for me, I have because I'm very passionate about this, and I feel more of a call to it. I I feel more of a call to the work, that I want to be the person that people feel like they can approach with these conversations. Because here's the reality: if you approach the wrong person, it's not going to go across well. Like if we attempt to engage people who aren't ready to have these conversations, it's just going to, everything that you thought is what's going to be reinforced. And so we don't want people to have these conversations who aren't ready. So I'm good with taking on that responsibility to a marked degree. I've leveraged myself in my building to be that person, but I've also created opportunities for that to happen. So I do book studies. And so people who are interested in that participate in those book studies, so that it is not every 5 minutes someone's at my door. It is, there's a book study going to start on this date. It's going to run from these dates, this date to this date. If you want to participate, let me know. I'm going to send you out the book. And then someone did ask in the chat, and I'll put this in the chat, about counselors and how you can do this work with counselors. And so this is a very good book, Interrupting Racism, and it is Equity and Social Justice in School Counseling. I did a book study with the counselors here in my building. It is a great read. I would recommend you do a book study with your counseling department, because this is, the narrative will really guide you through how you want to approach this equity work. So I will drop this information, the book information in the chat as well.
Thank you so much. Just in the conversation that you're having, like, I know I work at Illinois Wesleyan. I hate to call them out, but I'm going to call them out. We did on Martin Luther King Day, we had like an in-service day, and it was all over Zoom because of the pandemic, but it was all about, we were supposed to be having these important dialogues, but the whole day, like, we'd have like a big session with everyone. And then for the dialogue parts, we broke up into groups where the people of color went to one group and the white people went to another group. And the idea was, like Keisha was saying, because the people of color are tired of doing the work for the white people, and we have to do our own work. But I will say there were several of us in the session that we were like, but we need to hear those voices, and we need to have those conversations. And who can I go to, to have real conversations? Like, I just felt like all of us together in the white room, we're like, it was just our perspectives again. And we need to be able to open that dialogue. So I appreciate just everything that's happening here. I know that you kind of answered the counseling question. I don't know if either one of you, Jen or Keisha, have some information that would be great about advice for school counselors. We also have a question about advice for working with families that are unfamiliar or afraid to hear about the Black Lives Matter movement. We don't have much longer, but if any of you want to answer either of those questions. So, advice working for families that are unfamiliar or afraid to hear about the Black Lives Matter movement.
Many of the white teachers that I work with and teacher candidates, one of the first discussions we have when talking about Black Lives Matter is, what is your relationship with police, right? For many white people, specifically, they're either married to or related to. And so the words Black Lives Matter, due to its bias in the media, has come to represent anti-cop, right? And so it's a lot of working through that first. So I really talk about the history of Black Lives Matter as a movement, starting with Ida B. Wells, who stood up and said, hey, we matter, right? We have an issue happening here. And all through the way how Black organizations, Black leadership have worked to say Black Lives Matter, right? Beyond just Portland, right? What you've seen in response to George Floyd or to Philando Castile. But it's also framing it around being an organization that is an international organization, first off, that is fighting against the historic and present day state-sanctioned violence against Black people. And so state-sanctioned does not also equate to just law enforcement, and of course includes it, but it is about the medical system, the education system, like all the systems that perpetuate in society that are anti-Black and are for inequity and oppression of Black people. And so when it's framed that way, you have to shift that lens away from saying that a Black life matter means that we hate the cops, right? Because that's what a lot of white people hear.
And I also think you have to give statistics. So again, teaching at a school that was primarily white, and I remember wanting to do a poem by Kwame Alexander, "Take a Knee," and parents getting upset because they didn't want their children exposed to that. And I was being anti-military by reading a poem about taking a knee. And what I had to do is I really had to I had to teach parents. And so I had to provide the statistics from, I think Learning for Justice had coupled with the Southern, oh my goodness, Brian Alexander's organization to, and had some data about racism in schools and different information. And so I had to provide that data to my parents and really educate them about why this perspective also had a place in our school and in my classroom. And I think that sometimes we take that parent education piece for granted. I also like what Dr. Jones said about making the students the voice and getting students involved in surveys and letting them be the advocates to also teach their parents. But there's an education component that parents and the community often gets left out of that I think is really important. And I won't even say just parents, I would say our boards. If we look at the statistics for board, most board members are white males. And so we also need to educate our school boards about why those perspectives are important to have in our classrooms.
Yeah, and I don't have much to offer. I agree with Keisha 100% that with that parent engagement and education. I think as much as we want to believe that parents somehow have like this knowledge or skill set, they don't a lot of times. And I think that most times parents operate out of a fear, especially around race issues, as many of us do. And so I would really seek to understand what is the messaging that you're afraid of. What is it that you think is being taught or said that you're afraid of? And so I know watching the news, like the senator's name is going to escape me at the moment, just watching the news last week, and seeing critical race theory in the news last week, and how I think it was Oklahoma at the time not wanting critical race theory taught. And one of the senators was saying, I don't want my daughter, and he was a white male, I don't want my daughter going to school and learning or being taught that she's a bad person because she's white. Well, I don't think that's the narrative. But at the same time, I don't want my daughter going to school and learning that she's not a good person because she's Black. And so I think that the way we message, and that is that's the messaging is what needs to go out to parents, because there's a fear there that's not oftentimes explained. We have to take time and invest in our parents and in the community so that they understand, exactly what is it that we're communicating. Race matters are very sensitive matters to people. And we all have culture and history and pride in who we are, and we want it to be reflected well. And so we have to take the time to invest in that communication to what's going out there. So it's all a fear-based concern, and we have to unpack those fears.
Thank you so much. So I want to acknowledge this last comment that was added to the chat before we start to wrap up. And so the question was asked: as an educator and a school board member, I tend to see the same group of individuals attend anti-racist training. I also notice many that do attend such workshops, such as this conference, tend to be women and women of color. Do you have any recommendations on how to get others involved or engaged? And so I know we're short on time, but was there anything that you guys wanted to add there about, and I know we talked a lot about some of these ideas, but any last minute pieces about getting folks engaged who maybe are not people of color, women, etc.
I have been struggling with this as far as within the system of education and professional development and in higher ed. And it is controversial, but because race is such a sensitive and personal issue, especially for white people who are in the dominant group, they can make a choice. It is their privilege to never have to address race if they don't have to, because that's their positionality. So it has been my position, and my positionality being half white and half Mexican, essentially Latinx, is it needs to be mandatory. Otherwise, they'll never come to the table, right? And so as part of what Illinois has done is, hey, if you want to be a licensed teacher, guess what? You're going to have all of this. And if you're an in-service teacher, if you want to stay licensed, you're going to need to have all of this. And if that goes across 50 states, you know, I know Illinois is one of many, but if we can spread that across, then school board members and other legislative people who do make educational policy can't ignore it and can't act like it doesn't impact them or it's something they need to address.
Jen, I would completely agree. Stephanie was an employee of District 204, and I remember when we had Glenn Singleton come and talk about creative conversations, and there was this huge backlash because people felt, how dare he? He's calling out my whiteness, and I don't feel comfortable having these conversations, so they need to stop. So we have to, it can't be voluntary. It can't be based on a select few what we get to talk about when it benefits all children. Because when we talk about Black joy, Black resistance, that impacts all children. And I think that's where that's I don't know why we're bumping up against that, why some people don't understand. If we read Heather McGee's book, The Sum of Us, that all the things that undergird Blackness, that lifts all boats. And so when we understand the issues with our Black students, and when we affirm them, we affirm all of our students. And we don't get to just kind of X out of that.
So I'll just say, you know, for me, still it goes back to this idea of, you know, really just refusing to remain silent about the climate of the country and the loss of life that we're experiencing at the hands of, you know, other Black persons, unbothered police personnel, penal systems, and so on. So it means we make sure we push that content into classrooms and make it part of our conversations daily. We give students an opportunity to dialogue and ask questions. We don't give our kids credit, and we don't give them enough credit. They are living in this world. We have to address these. We can't ignore their realities. There are shared realities. So we have to give them the opportunities to ask questions and dialogue and unpack their confusion and their fears. And we have to lend ourselves to the cause and be really transparent in the dialogue about, you know, what we think and how we feel. We're people, we're educators and we're professionals, but we're people, and we're humane, and we have thoughts and feelings about, you know, for me, how do I feel every day to come home and see people who look like me on the news dying? I need to be able to talk to my students about that. Because even though I have the right to remain silent, doing so makes me complicit in this system that's oppressive. And I don't want to be complicit in that. When we think about reimagining education, we have to totally shift our thinking to what it means to really educate the whole child. We talk about that. That's just modern cliche. You know, we say we have all these buzzwords and catchphrases that mean absolutely nothing anymore. But we got to get away from saying things just to say them and doing things just to do them. Reading, writing, arithmetic, that's old, it's antiquated, it's necessary, but it's not holistically inclusive to a child's learning experience. If we are really concerned about preparing our kids for the future, we have to teach them how to live in the present. And that means developing curriculum that engages social justice, equity, and issues around cultural relevance. If we can't develop models that teach against tolerance, but teach valuing and acceptance, we failed our kids. We can't align curriculum that introduce colorful epithets of history, but don't give honest, transparent depictions of our struggles and contributions and triumphs cross-culturally. Like, we have to be able to paint it all. And so I'll leave it there, but we have to, history is not enough just to introduce curriculum of ethnic studies or African-American history. What does that curriculum entail? It can't just paint the picture of the struggle. It has to paint the picture of the triumphs and the contributions. It has to contain it all.
Thank you. I know. Thank you so much. I mean, I wish this could go on for, I've never hated ending something more. And now my dogs are going to be noisy. I apologize. This has just been wonderful. I wish we could just go out to lunch and sit and continue this conversation.
I'm vexed.
I am learning so much. And I just, this is one of the best conversations I feel like we've had. So anyway, thank you so much. Martha is going to put in the chat, she's going to put, she already has it in there, where you fill out the evaluation and you can get your professional development. Sorry, I'm thinking of so many other things than how I'm supposed to wrap this up. I have so many other things I want to talk about and I want to ask. I have to give away a book. So we have 3 panelists. Anybody have a birthday on the 3rd of any month? Anyone? You can put in the chat. Anybody have a birthday on the 3rd? No, that's not going to work. Anybody have a birthday on the 24th? Because I have a birthday on the 24th, so why not? You know, anybody have a birthday on the 24th? No? All right. Let me see who, let's see. I'm trying to go. Oh my gosh. Sorry, my kids are home now. Let's see. I'm on Zoom. Tony Nicolade. I don't know how I'm saying that. Do you have a book yet? Would you like a book? I'm just picking somebody out of the chat that asked a question. Tony, are you here?
I think I see Allison Albert.
Oh, Allison Albert. All right. Oh, good. And Tony already has a book. Great. Allison, you've got a book. How's that? Sound good? If you, I think Jan will send that out to you. Thank you again.